just to go ahead and introduce yourself. Yeah. So if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Okay. Hi, I'm Carrie Freeman, co-CEO of Second Muse.
And what does Second Muse do?
We are an innovation and impact company, and our focus is on how do we build inclusive economies, economies that work for all people and the planet, and we support entrepreneurs and the ecosystems around them. So that's a lot of buzzwords, but really it is how do we support people who are out there trying to make a difference with their business, starting up a business and trying to do things differently, but yet they need help and support. And so we work all along, I would say, kind of the process with them. And other times when people and organizations are saying, look, we need our economies to change, we'd say, yes, let's come in and actually help identify and find these innovative solutions and the leaders behind them that are really making the world a place where we're all excited to be in.
One of the things about running a company that is really built around a big mission and a high concept is understanding what that looks like in the real world and on a day-to-day basis. Could you walk us through like a project or that Second Muse has worked on to help us understand what that looks like in the real world?
Absolutely. So one of the projects that we are currently working on, and we've been at this for a few years now, is called Get Cities. It's gender equality in tech. And the intent is, how do we create a more inclusive tech industry in the United States? And the intent is, let's do this and let's really showcase this in 3 hub cities and show that it can be done. So if you track just how gender plays out in the tech industry, at least in the United States, it's about 25% of the tech industry is women, and only about 3% of those are Black women. So it's even smaller. And, for the last several decades, millions of dollars have been poured into this, and the tech giants have put money into it, and the numbers haven't been improving. And so the intent is, how do we go into these cities and through a mix of different partnerships, collaborations, and innovation program, really signal to the world that the tech industry is ripe for change and ripe for more inclusion? And how do we support women in their journey? And those women can be in the university setting, moving into the industry within large companies or small companies. They can be founders saying, look, I want to start up an AI company, and this is exactly what I'm doing. And so supporting them with all sorts of different mentors, capital, care, right? And just support in general. And then getting people to really unite in this aspect. And so we are working specifically in Chicago, in Washington, D.C., and in Miami in the United States. And the primary funder from this is Pivotal Ventures, like I said. So it's a Melinda Gates backed initiative. And her intent is, how do we truly create gender equality broadly in the world, right? We're over a century away, depending on how we're looking at things, and the pandemic wiping out some of our really good progress that's been made. But this is an area that we believe is just so important. And so we run different types of programs, and we do this year over year. Some of our longest run programs we've been working on for over a decade. And it's really moving this needle to a more creative, inclusive, innovative world. And thankfully, there's a lot of visionaries in the world that also want to support that and say, this is how we do it. And we know that these changes take a lot of time. And so how do we balance quick wins as well as the longer term, broader vision of where we're headed?
The idea of balancing quick wins with the longer term vision as a success ingredient when you're working toward a large mission is so powerful. You are working toward a large mission. How do we make the world a more inclusive place? How do we make economies more inclusive? What insight have you learned from the work that you have done at Second Muse, that the entire organization does? What are some of the key lessons that you have learned about how to make progress and run a business around a big mission that's working on long-term change?
Yeah, thank you. It's incredibly difficult. And I don't know that we've fully figured out the secret sauce either. You know,
I'm relieved to hear that. I'm like, I'm relieved, and I can't wait for you to do it though.
we're working on it. We're working on it. But yes, it's so hard, right? It's so hard to take a big, broad system view and recognize that, there are milestones along the way. So all of our programs have a clear theory of change. And this includes the impact that we intend to have with it and how we're going to measure it. We've got a team of people, and we bring in outside experts to really help us hone this idea of what exactly are we intending to do with this program, and then how do we measure it? And it's something we've been truly working on honing for over a decade, and really thinking about how this is done. I'll give you an example. Literally, I just got off a call a couple of hours ago for one of our programs, and one of our partners and I were sitting there kind of scratching our chins on this, that our goal is to eliminate ocean plastics with a program called the Incubator Network. And so we're starting this in Singapore. We work all across Southeast Asia, but that's a really daunting, big challenge that we have, and how do you even measure? How do you begin to look at that? And so there are certain things that we really put in place of saying, our theory of change is we are going to work with organizations along the value chain, startups that are really focusing on how do we eliminate plastic use in general? How do we recycle plastic use better? And so all along the way, we're saying, okay, let's work with people to understand the impact that they're having and measure it. And then let's communicate that through both the quantifiable, elements of this, as well as the stories. I think one of the things we've also found over the years is our work inspires hope. People don't want to pay for hope. That sounds like a very political thing, right? But everyone wants to know that there are great things happening out there and people are making a difference. And so it's really important for us as well to create what we call relational wealth and to enhance it, to create more support mechanisms, to create actual support and care for everyone that we come in contact with through our programs. And then to tell the stories about that, because some of our programs only touch, partners for maybe 3, 6, 12 months, and then they go on their way. But hopefully we have created enough of that relational wealth and helped people nurture it in a way that they're going to go off and continue to grow from it, grow their businesses, grow their solutions, grow the impact that they're having in their communities. So it's a part combination of measure where you can, know what you're trying to do, measure where you can, communicate that, as well as recognize the relational and storytelling components.
The concept of relational wealth, I'd love to stay here for a moment, because my sense is that when I think about these large projects that you work on at all the different stakeholders that are involved, they both require relational wealth and generate relational wealth. Where did this concept come from?
I would say it's been building. Like I said, we're in our 14th year and we continue to evolve our own theory of change and our own thinking. But at the core of it, we have always said people and organizations have to collaborate to be able to address these big challenges. So there's been an element of like this human component of collaboration that has always been part of our DNA. We often find ourselves supporting, very technical solutions and people with new products, but that in and of itself is not enough. We know that to create the world in which we envision, it actually takes people, right? At the end of the day, we all make decisions. People make decisions. It's decisions in corporations, it's decisions in government organizations. And so this idea of creating additional relational capacities is so critical. So we think about how we support individuals in their relationships with one another. Trying to move away from such a transactional society, right? Because it's not working, right? We're definitely making progress on some fronts, but we definitely need to continue to do that. And then we think about it also very clearly from who has power and what is the power that they have. So we look at, across the board, what are the kind of incumbent power holders? Oftentimes people think of power in terms of like, large corporate executives or government leaders, and absolutely but we all have a form of power that we can provide to others who have less power. And so we're pretty heady, we're pretty complex in our approach to this. But I also like to think of it as just attempting to be more human in a world where business for probably a century has not been so human. When we started, moving away from more locally based communities, a lot of that humanness kind of started degenerating as well, because we don't know people on the other end of supply chains, quite frankly, right? We don't always know who our farmers are, who's providing our food. Sure, we may go to the farmers market, we may have pleasantry conversations, but it's really how do we create that community and those relationships with those around us, whether that's actually physically around us or in a virtual setting.
I can relate so much to what you're saying, in economics, which I first started studying in
Mhm.
Montezuma, New Mexico. One of the first concepts that we learned about was externalities. And this idea of who pays for the plant's pollution. It's an
Mhm.
externality that isn't part of their costs, but we all pay for it. And what I have learned is that the less connected we are to one another in an age of global supply chains, it's easy to be disconnected from the reefs dying in the South Pacific or from something that's happening on the other side of the world. So I'm saying what you're saying, like to fulfill the vision and the mission of your organization, it's finding these entry points and having this philosophy that allows, the philosophy change that allows these things to happen. So this idea of relational, the smaller we can make the world, the theory is that the more accountability and responsibility we're going to have to find solutions together.
Absolutely. You said it so
Yeah.
well. Look at
Yeah.
you.
I'm listening. I've got my headphones
That
in
is
here. Yeah.
that is so perfect. Yes, we do. We often talk about our current economies were designed in a way to not take into account these externalities. You could say maybe we didn't know better. Maybe it was intentional, but at the end of the day, I think we also like to think of it as we know better now, so therefore we should do better,
Yeah.
right? How do we make markets that don't harm people? How do we make, how do we create industries that don't harm the planet? So yes, we know better. So we're
Yes.
working on that every day. We work on that.
So, curious, you mentioned that, for instance, in the Women in Tech project, the funder, in a project like that is Pivotal Ventures, which is, of course, Melinda Gates's initiative. And she's spoken very clearly about the need for gender equity globally and especially in tech. As you were saying that, I was thinking about our listeners who have big projects, who are looking at how they start to cultivate the network and relationships to connect with these visionaries who have budget, who have power, who have access to resources to bring those projects to life. So my sort of practical, tactical question for you is, what advice would you give to our listeners about building the networks to be able to get in front of, sponsors, power players, people who have access to the resources to make big stuff happen? What have you learned about that in your career that you could share with us?
Mhm. I think one of the biggest takeaways is how do you continue to build trusting, nurturing relationships and really leverage those? And I think it's hard if you don't have them, right? So I definitely recognize that the question is more geared towards if you don't have them. But I think one of the best ways to do that is to work on building relationships with people that do have them. We work with over 600 organizations globally. Our largest program is a NASA program. It's called International Space Apps Challenge. And literally, we work with over 600 organizations around the globe. So I think the first thing is if you don't have them at all, get out there and network and try to work with those that do. That doesn't mean that you get a shoe in right away. I mean, literally, I was on another call this morning and someone said, "Can you please get Melinda Gates to come speak at this?" And I'm like, I would love that. I don't think I can. I, just being honest.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but so it's not necessarily a shoe in, but I think especially in this world of so many of us trying to have positive impact, the notion of collaboration is really at the heart and center of it. And so how do we support one another? How do we provide access, right? So my suggestion for those that are saying, hey, I've got this amazing idea, get out there and engage, support partners, get it programs. There's so many amazing accelerator type programs right now. I like to think that ours are unique and wonderful, but the reality is there's so much good stuff happening right now, but becoming a part of it. I think one of the things too is really think of it not so much of like, how can I get stuff for me, but how can I give? So in all of our types of programs and all of our work, it's like, how do we make relationships valuable for both or all? Because if you're coming at it from an incredibly extractive perspective, the likelihood is your relationship's not going to flourish, right? And you're not going to have access. So think of it more in terms of how do we truly build relational wealth? So how do I get, access that I need, and how do I contribute? How do I contribute to community?
Yeah, this concept of relational wealth is really powerful. I think when you take it to heart and you think about how you can imbue that, as a strategy, a long-term strategy to fulfill both vision, mission, and business goals. Through the
Absolutely,
projects.
absolutely. I will say, let me just add one thing on this. I will say too that I think, especially from a female founder perspective, it's always this fine balance between how much we give of ourselves and how much we put boundaries on it. And so one of the things that I have learned is just kind of being emotional support for others at times. I mean, there's oftentimes when we need like straight up help with introductions and, guidance on some sort of business aspect. But I think there are times when it's like, oh my goodness, this is so hard. Can I just talk? And so how do you provide that? How do you make that space for people? How do you take space when you need it? All at the same time of balancing all the other demands that we have. It's, we never get there, but I think it's something to really, really think about, as well as, helping others doesn't always, take a ton of effort.
Yeah, powerful. Through the projects that Second Muse works on, you've had this opportunity to work with incredible entrepreneurs and founders from all over the world, help them accelerate, get better, and solve some of these issues. That these big thorny issues that we as a planet are dealing with.
Yep.
So I wanted to take some time to kind of, from that perspective of being an organization and being a leader who has worked closely with founders, helping them to accelerate, especially helping minority and women-led companies accelerate. I would love to explore first some of the blocks that you have seen, that sort of common blocks that may have held back the growth of the companies that you've worked with. What are some themes or trends that you see that would be helpful for us as founders in that category to know about?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest blocks is really understanding the different users, right? I mean, you can think of it as human-centered design. I mean, you can just think of it as understanding your customers, but really going out in the field, if you will, and understanding who you're creating for and what are the challenges, right? Sometimes we have people say, this would be absolutely amazing. We're going to create this new type of paint or this sealant on the bottom of that can be used on the bottom of a boat or a ship, and it's amazing. And it's like that technically that may be like absolutely what's needed, but how are people going to use it? What does it entail? How do people buy it? And just really, really getting involved in the understanding of how this will affect people, the users, all sorts of things, as well as the planet. So I think that just getting a good understanding of what's surrounding your business is probably the first thing. It seems simple, but it's hard. It's hard, especially during COVID, right? I mean,
totally.
yeah.
But there's something else that I'm so curious about, because I'm so with you on that. And so this idea of, it sounds simple, but it's simple and easy are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wish they were.
Exactly.
So simple is, look, connect with the users, really understand the users. They're probably the holders of many of the answers. See if it's relevant. One of the things that I have experienced and observed, that as companies get bigger and bigger, the leader of that company sometimes can get more and more removed from the user as she becomes more, takes on more of initially an operator role, because very often it's the owner operator is how so many founders are starting. You know what it's like to lead a big organization. What advice would you have for founders who are leading organizations, who have teams, who have the bigger initiatives that they need to lead? What insight can you share with them about staying close to the user experience?
Mhm, mhm. I think one of the biggest things is just do it. If
Yeah.
it's
Make the time.
well, well, but when you're curious, I think that's one of the things, I've had people forever tell me, um, Carrie, how did you find that out? And I'm like, well, I had a question in my mind. And instead of me going asking one of you or one of your direct reports, I just started digging. And I started going through data and I started going through our own reports. And then I went and did external, verification, and I talked to people. And so I don't do this often. I don't have time for it often. I also don't feel the deep need, but I do think it is this element of curiosity and digging in. We don't know, if you don't try things out, you're never going to know, does it work? Does this process work or does it not? We always have all these processes, and I'm like, hey guys, I tried to do this and this was awful. I hate to tell you that the intent is good, the actual user experience is bad.
Facts, no judgment. Facts,
No
no
facts,
judgment.
no judgment. I found myself a big funder. My name gets signed on everything, and sometimes the emails come to me, and instead of me handing them off to someone else, I found myself saying, hey, look, we need to verify this data, and I could have very easily passed it off to someone else and say, will you please go answer this question and put it in, respond, etc. And I didn't. It was rare, but I had a couple of hours that day. And of course, I had a long list of things I needed to do. But instead, I was like, I'm going to go find this out. And it's so powerful. I think what we learn is just, it's exactly what we need to know when we need to know it. And so I tell people, occasionally just be curious about something and dig in for it for yourself, whatever that may be. And I think of it as it's incredibly important to be visionary and to kind of zoom out, big picture, connect the dots, have clear strategy. It's equally as important to zoom in and understand your business and the nitty-gritty details and the human component of it. So be curious and jump in when you have, and even if you don't think you have the time.
And I think that really goes to how we lead, how we effectively lead, that we're able to stay future focused and up high, but we're also able to strategically get into the weeds sometimes and dig in and check out what's going on beneath the surface. So we talked about use a disconnection from user experience or from our users being a block to growth. What's another block that you have identified that you see that might decelerate or be a growth blocker for women-led or minority-led companies?
I think not having enough diverse thoughts and thinking, whether that's actual people or being really set on things. It's common everywhere, right? I think this goes back to a bit of using, understanding your user, but also just being open to ideas coming from everywhere, including men.
Yeah.
Right. I think
Wow.
often, wow, imagine that. Well, I say that because I think there are times, when we get so set on like, no, this is it. And it's like, well, that's part of it. I think in any sort of system or scenario, there are truths for sure, but there are oftentimes multiple truths, but there's also just different ways of thinking. So I think as hard as it is to get ourselves to think through different mental models, to surround ourselves with that and to seek it out, and to not get our feelers hurt when, people are like, this is not great, or like, did you think of it from this perspective? Because it's all valid and it's going to make us more robust. It's, quite frankly, it's kind of this whole notion, one of the first cases from an ROI perspective, why do you include more diverse opinions and people? Because it's going to make you better. And so I think, and it's hard when you're in startup mode, right? So hard, or even small mode, right? You're like, no, I need to do this. I need to focus. I can't have all this other Doesn't mean you have to let it seep in and completely shift your perspective, but it's going to make your business so much more robust. And it's going to give you access to some of those possible blind spots or opportunities.
Well, this really relates to my next question, which is how to stay future focused and out of the weeds as a CEO. I think many of our listeners, not all, but are at this growth edge where in order to grow, the business requires that she is more future focused, that she is staying a little bit more high level, that she's not in the details to the degree that she may have had to be in the past. But knowing that you need to do that and doing it are two different things. And I was curious about your perspective and experience on elevating yourself as a leader and sort of practical ways in which you made that transition. Of course, you've been a CEO for a while now, but if we can sort of flash back to when you were elevating and some of the things that you had to learn or do in order to elevate and lead.
Absolutely. So I think it's first so important for everyone to acknowledge this is so hard, right? You know that. That's why you're asking it. People are struggling with
Totally.
it. It's hard, right? So I think maybe the first thing is give yourself some grace, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledge, hey, this is a hard space I'm in. It's okay. I'll get there. But I think that there's multiple things in terms of both mindset as well as like tactical things that you can do. And I think the first thing is really think about how you can get creative in utilizing additional resources, right? You may not be able to hire someone. You may not be able to hire an HR person, or you may not be able to hire, once you've hired the HR person, you may not be able to hire a recruiter or whatever it may be. But I think thinking about how you can tap into other people wanting to support you. I think women are in a very fantastic position for this of saying, okay, how can I engage other women or other people that maybe want to work 10 hours a week or that are retired and love this mission and are willing to support me in a consistent way. So I think the first thing is get super creative with how can you get yourself out of the weeds, right? Because oftentimes things need to be done. And so getting creative and, we don't have to just hire someone full time. And that seems simple, but I think the more we can get creative with it, the better. And then once you've surrounded yourself with people that can help you with that, whatever they may be, you have to let go. You know what? Be okay. Mistakes are going to happen. Even if they're not mistakes, things are going to be done differently than you would like them possibly, or that you would do them. But you're not going to be able to come up and take a more strategic or high level position if others can't be empowered and have the agency to work around you. This happens all the time to me still. And last summer I was in a situation where I thought I had reached it. And then I had a couple.
Yeah, I made it.
I'm here. And then I had a couple people out of the company for a variety of reasons. And I'm like, okay, I'm back in the weeds in a big way. And as soon as I hired someone else, I handed things off right away. And someone said to me, Carrie, I think you kind of let people, I think you let people fly on their own too soon. And I'm like, well, maybe, but you know what? I had to do that. The company needed it and we're okay. Yep. Some things were not, we had some mistakes and it's okay. We're okay. So yeah, be comfortable with that. Be comfortable with other people making mistakes. One of the other things that I often tell women just in general, those that report to me is, understand when 80%. So once you've prioritized, you've done all those things, some things still need your attention. Understand what needs 80% of your, 80% quality, for example. And no one wants to hear that, right? Why would you put forth 80%? I'm like, because that's enough. Versus when do you need to put forth 110%? And knowing that, because oftentimes if we get caught up in this has to be perfect, so much of our energy and time gets sucked into that. And I'm like, no, it really didn't need to be. Your 80% is better than enough.
I can feel my blood pressure just going down, even just hearing that. And so I so appreciate you sharing that, because I think it is a message that we need to hear, especially from powerful women. It's okay. So here's a question then. What criteria can you recommend or advise to help a leader to make the distinction between an 80% focus task or project and a 110% focus project? What advice do you have around that? Because this is fascinating.
I think on some of it, I think it almost always entails what is the next step, right? Is the next step, what is the fidelity of the decision that's going to be made with this information, right? Is this the only chance you get at something? Is there something on the line, right? Is this your time to shine? Then maybe it's that 110%. Or is this just something, is it, are you coming from a place of ego where you're like, I want this to look good and seem amazing? But if it's not actually, if the ramifications aren't going to be there, if it's not quite right, then let it go. So I think a lot of it is really understanding kind of what's at stake. And, how do you know that? Well, is it the last time? Is this the last time you're going to get in front of someone? So I think of pitching, I think of pitching for new work or new, funding, whatever it may be. I mean, there are oftentimes when you only have one time with a certain group of people, go 110%. Versus if it's someone and you're really more in ideation stage and you're trying to convince someone, but that a decision is not going to be made at that point in time, then it probably doesn't matter. I also think of it when it comes to more, operationally, internally focused things with people. What is the impact you're going to have on employees? Right? If this is something that every single detail matters, then you have to get it right. The nuance, the wording, the process, take the time to get it right. If it's something that is broad brush strokes and you're not going to hurt anyone, then it's probably okay to iron out the details later. But I think of that, from those perspectives. I also think of it in terms of, like just visually, say if you're presenting a deck or something, I get it. We all want things to look beautiful. Your presentation, your Miro board, your whatever, your video. But does it help you in a way that you need to, kind of going back to, is this your one shot chance? Or is it just something that you're a perfectionist and you want it to be amazing? Because it's oftentimes just not worth it, right? I mean, think about, I mean, this is so silly, but think about getting dressed in the morning. Does it really matter? You're going to look great, right? You're going to put on something that looks professional and it looks right. Does it really matter if it's this outfit or this outfit? Probably not.
Well, I think it's Jeff Bezos who talks about type 1 and type 2 decisions. Like type 1 decisions are the ones they're a little bit irreversible or they're really hard to get out of. There's a lot at stake. Type 2, it's a revolving. And so that's really, really helpful in terms of the caliber of attention. Yeah.
I think so too. I think so many of us don't really think there's lots of type, I think it's how do you figure out what the type 1 or the type 2, right?
It's true.
But that's a great way to think about it.
So I'd like to turn now to the work that the big mission really of Second Muse and this idea of how do we grow economies without harming the planet? Because our vision is really about proving a model of economic growth that nourishes the planet one woman-owned business at a time. That's like the mission of our company. And so I connect so much with the big work that you're doing at Second Muse. What's one specific practice? Because when I think about, so I'll give you just a quick example, when I was building my business, I did a ton of speaking. It was all about speaking at live events. And so I was flying, the major industry, really important, and also potentially not that great for the environment. Just a little example of how growth can sometimes unintentionally create economic or externalities that we're not aware of. And that's just a very simple example. But I'm curious from your perspective about a specific practice or insights that allows for economic growth without environmental destruction. Like, how do we need to change in order to drive growth without harming our planet?
I think the very first part, and we worked on a program called the Food System Vision Prize. We worked in partnership with Rockefeller Foundation on this, and this was identifying visionaries from around the globe that have said, what does a truly regenerative, resilient food system look like in 2050? And I think one of the key things coming out of there is we know this, but it looks different in different places. But having that vision is so incredibly important. But I honestly think the first thing for all of us is getting really grounded in what is the negative impact that we are having, and what are the opportunities. So, I feel like I'm back in my MBA program again, 20 plus years ago, but there's this ongoing idea of do people make better choices if they know more, right? This whole, does education get us out of there? And we could say, it really doesn't. But it's incredibly hard to actually get people to an awareness. I mean, you had awareness that you're creating quite a lovely carbon footprint for yourself. And you made that decision. And maybe you also said, hey, look, I'm not going to do this forever. I'm going to offset. I don't know what you did. But without even having that knowledge, it's really hard to then go forth and come up with creative solutions for it. And I think of that way with our businesses and everything that we work on. I'm saying, okay, what are the negative impacts that we are creating because of this? And where could we be doing better? Our largest footprint still is flights, transportation, just broadly. And so we were really good last year.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
I'm like, yeah. But I think that's the first start of it, of really understanding, okay, so, this is what we're working towards. What are the negative impacts of it? So I would just quite frankly say the very first step is truly understanding your own impact, whatever that may be, and owning it. And then coming up with creative solutions and understanding that. And I think it's that way with all the organizations that we work with. I think one of the things that we see with women-led businesses is, quite frankly, we are more holistic in our thinking, right? Because we're understanding and connecting the dots of like, okay, we could take a waste thing and it's going to help from a food perspective, but it's also going to have an impact on climate as well. And we're also going to do this from farmers who don't have access to things. And so I think in general, what I see is that women can hold the space for thinking across multiple areas of a system, really, if you will.
It's been such a pleasure connecting with you. As we wrap up our conversation, I would love to get a sense of where our people can go to learn more about Second Muse projects, to get involved, and see how they might be able to participate in the work that you're doing globally.
Yes. Meet up with us on our website, and we're across the different social media accounts. We're here. So much of our work happens in communities around the globe that truly you can engage in something if you're very interested in it. So yes, definitely, I'd say that's the best place to start, honestly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This is great.
Awesome.